The front door stopped moving because my father planted himself in the middle of it. He didn't look at my face first. His eyes went straight to the captain's bars on my army service dress uniform, then down to the faded canvas duffel bag hanging from my shoulder. The same bag had crossed 3 military airfields, 2 cargo flights, and more security checkpoints than I cared to count over the past 15 months. "You should have called," Clifton Rutherford said. "I did. No, you left messages. I was deployed." He shrugged as if that explained why my own family couldn't return a phone call. Behind him, soft jazz drifted through the house. Crystal glasses clinked together. Someone laughed. For one strange second, I thought maybe Grandpa had invited investors over again. He loved hosting quiet dinners where business never stayed business for long. Then I noticed everyone wearing black. My sister Cassie stood beside the grand staircase in a silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly military housing allowance. A champagne flute rested in her hand. Her fiancé, Giles Davenport, adjusted the cuff of his tailored jacket while pretending not to stare at me. Nobody looked surprised that I had shown up. They looked annoyed. "I made emergency leave as soon as my paperwork cleared," I said. "Where's Grandpa?" No one answered. Clifton finally stepped aside just enough for me to see the portrait hanging above the fireplace. A black ribbon had been wrapped around the frame. My stomach tightened. "When?" I asked quietly. 3 weeks ago." The words landed harder than any explosion I'd heard overseas. 3 weeks. 3 weeks and nobody had told me. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled through missed calls, emails, military routing messages. Nothing. Attorney notices from work. Logistics updates. Nothing from home. "I would have come. You couldn't. I would have tried." Clifton folded his arms. The funeral already happened. Silence settled across the foyer. Cassie took a slow sip of champagne. "I'm sorry you missed it," she said. "Grandpa would have understood." Her voice sounded polished, practiced. Grandpa never would have accepted that excuse. He mailed handwritten letters to my overseas APO address every month, even when arthritis made his handwriting shaky. The last package he sent included homemade peanut brittle sealed in 3 plastic bags because he knew military mail handlers weren't exactly gentle. The package also contained a carved wooden black queen chess piece. His note had been unusually short. "Keep this close. Some games don't end when people think they do." I had read that sentence a dozen times during deployment. Standing there now, I felt it crawl back into my thoughts. Something about this house felt wrong. Not sad, organized, like everyone had rehearsed this afternoon. Giles walked over with the careful smile of a man trying to impress wealthy people. "Captain Rutherford," he said, "thank you for your service." I nodded. He held out his hand. I never took it. His smile disappeared almost instantly. "Good. Grandpa always said you learned more from someone after refusing their handshake than after accepting it." I looked past them toward the hallway leading to Grandpa's private study. The brass door was closed, locked. Odd. "Grandpa Hato inside?" I asked. Cassie's fingers tightened around her champagne glass. "No, I wasn't asking you. You don't have access anymore." The sentence hung in the air. "Access?" Clifton reached into a leather document folder resting on a nearby table. "I'm not dragging this out." He removed several legal papers clipped neatly together. "Your grandfather updated his estate plan." I stared at him. What does that have to do with walking into his office? Everything. He handed the documents toward me without taking another step. "The estate has already gone through preliminary settlement." I didn't move. "The attorneys handled everything." I wasn't notified. "Military deployment complicates things." "No," I said. "It delays conversations. It doesn't erase." His jaw tightened. For the first time, my mother, Sybil, finally spoke from the dining room doorway. "Felicity, don't make today harder than it already is." Harder. That word almost made me laugh. I missed my grandfather's final days. I missed his funeral. Nobody had called. Nobody had waited. And somehow I was making their day difficult. Grandpa used to tell me something whenever contractors blamed everyone except themselves. "When people rush you toward paperwork, slow your feet." I still hadn't touched the documents. "I'll read them. You can read them somewhere else." The sentence came from Clifton. I looked at him carefully. "What does that mean?" "It means this gathering is private. I live here." "You did." Cassie glanced toward Giles, hiding a satisfied smile behind her glass. That tiny reaction bothered me more than Clifton's words. People smile when a plan works, not when grief does. I finally accepted the paperwork. The top page carried probate filing numbers from Norfolk County. Several signatures, several notarizations. Too many pages for something supposedly settled while I was halfway around the world. One line immediately caught my attention. "Revised testament." Revised. Grandpa had spent years telling me he hated rewriting legal documents because every revision created opportunities for mistakes. Why would he suddenly change everything near the end? The black chess piece flashed through my mind again. Some games don't end when people think they do. I didn't understand it yet. But I knew Grandpa well enough to know he never wasted words. Clifton reached past me. The heavy oak door swung inward. Then he looked directly into my eyes. I think it's best if you leave now. Before I could answer, he pushed the door shut. The lock engaged with one sharp mechanical click. Not loud. Just final. I stood on the front steps holding my duffel bag in one hand and a stack of legal papers in the other, staring at the reflection of my own uniform in the glass. That house wasn't just expensive property. I had painted fences there during summer breaks, repaired loose shingles with Grandpa, counted inventory in the maintenance shed, spent Saturday mornings replacing cracked sprinkler heads because Grandpa believed owners should understand every inch of what they owned. Now I had been locked out like someone trying to break in. As I looked down at the legal notice, one sentence refused to leave my mind. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the revised will. It was Grandpa's last gift. A carved black queen with a message that suddenly felt less like affection and more like instructions. Whatever he wanted me to find hadn't disappeared when he did. I tightened my grip on the legal papers instead of knocking on the door again. If they wanted me gone that badly, I wasn't going to beg for permission to stand on my own family's front porch. The front door opened anyway. Not because someone had a change of heart. My mother stepped outside, carrying an old navy blue suitcase. She set it down beside the stone steps as though she were leaving out a package for pickup. I thought you'd want your things. I looked at the suitcase. It was the same one I'd packed for college 15 years earlier. You went through my room? There isn't a room anymore. There was this morning. There wasn't. She spoke with the calm tone people use when discussing furniture deliveries. No anger, no guilt. Just business. I unzipped the suitcase. Inside were old jeans, 2 faded sweatshirts from Wellesley High, a pair of running shoes with cracked soles, and a framed debate team certificate from my senior year. Nothing from my adult life. No family photographs. No letters from Grandpa. No military commendations I'd mailed home because I didn't trust overseas storage. Everything that proved I'd built a life after turning 18 had vanished. I closed the suitcase. Where are the rest of my belongings? They've been disposed of. The sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because of the monetary value. Because someone had decided I no longer deserved a history. Before I could answer, Clifton walked outside holding another envelope. I suggest you read this one. I opened it. The heading came from a Boston property law firm. Notice of lawful termination of occupancy. The guest house. Grandpa's guest house. The small brick cottage behind the main estate where I'd stayed whenever military leave brought me home. The place Grandpa always called your landing strip. I scanned the date. Filed 11 days earlier. Approved 7 days earlier. I wasn't notified. You weren't living there. I was deployed, exactly. I looked up. So while I was serving overseas, you filed eviction paperwork against me? Clifton didn't even blink. The guest house now belongs to the estate. The estate belonged to Grandpa. It belongs to Cassie. Cassie finally wandered onto the porch, carrying another champagne glass. I keep telling Dad not to explain legal things, she said with a smile. You always make everything sound so dramatic. I ignored her. The estate hasn't even finished probate. It doesn't have to, the revised will, Clifton answered. Everything transfers to your sister. $21 million? Every dollar. The number sounded ridiculous when spoken aloud. Not because Grandpa wasn't wealthy. He was. His commercial properties stretched across eastern Massachusetts, and I'd spent enough summers helping maintenance crews to understand exactly what he'd built. What sounded ridiculous was Grandpa leaving every asset to one granddaughter while completely cutting out the one who actually helped him manage the properties every time she came home. That wasn't the man who taught me how to read lease agreements before I learned to parallel park. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to make sense to you. It has to make sense to Grandpa. Clifton laughed once. Dead people don't explain themselves. No, they leave records. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not fear. More like irritation that I wasn't reacting the way he'd expected. He thought I'd cry, maybe yell, maybe accuse everyone of betrayal. Instead, I was thinking. Grandpa spent 42 years developing commercial real estate. He'd documented everything. Maintenance logs, tax files, insurance renewals, even handwritten notes about replacing broken sprinkler valves. A man like that didn't suddenly rewrite a $21 million estate without leaving a trail. My mother reached into her purse. One more thing. She handed me a folded bill. It took me a second to realize what it was, a wrinkled $100 bill. I looked from the cash to her face. What is this? Travel money. I flew here on military leave. You'll need somewhere else to stay. I almost laughed. $100. The Rutherford family spent more than that on floral centerpieces for charity dinners. Cassie glanced at Giles. I told Mom cash would be more useful than a check. Giles nodded politely. Hotels are expensive. I can afford a hotel. Not Boston hotels, Cassie replied. At least not on a government salary. Then she looked directly at my uniform. I mean, cyber forensics sounds impressive until you remember you're basically a government employee. A captain. Still government, she shrugged. You know what Dad always says. I already knew. She repeated it anyway. Unrefined government clerks don't belong in high society Boston. Even Giles looked uncomfortable hearing it out loud. Grandpa would have thrown them both out before dessert. He respected people who built things. Teachers, mechanics, soldiers, electricians. He once fired an executive for insulting a janitor. I remembered asking why. His answer never left me. Character isn't tested by how someone treats the owner. It's tested by how they treat the person emptying the trash. The irony almost made me smile. Grandpa had spent decades building a family name. Now the people hiding behind it couldn't recognize the values that created it. Cassie slowly walked down 2 steps until she stood close enough for only me to hear clearly. She lifted her right hand. A familiar ring of brass keys spun around her index finger. I recognized them immediately. Grandpa's private study. The original brass key still had a tiny scratch near the head where I'd dropped it onto concrete while helping Grandpa replace office locks years ago. She saw me looking. Oh, she smiled wider. I guess these are mine now. She let the keys spin again before catching them in her palm. You know, Felicity, life gets a lot easier once you accept your place. My place? At the bottom of the family hierarchy. She took another slow sip of champagne without breaking eye contact. I think everyone would be happier if you stopped pretending you ever belonged at the top. Nobody corrected her. Not Clifton, not Sybil, not Giles. Their silence said more than the insult itself. I picked up the suitcase with one hand and folded the eviction notice into my document folder with the other. I didn't throw away the $100 bill. Evidence isn't always paper filed in court. Sometimes it's the smallest insult people never expect you to remember. As I walked toward the driveway, I looked back once. Cassie was still twirling Grandpa's brass keys around her finger like they were jewelry instead of responsibility. She believed the house belonged to her now. She believed the fortune was already hers. And she believed I had just accepted defeat. She was wrong about all 3. The only thing I carried away that afternoon wasn't the suitcase or the legal notices. It was Grandpa's final message echoing louder than ever. Some games don't end when people think they do. I turned the motel room's deadbolt until it clicked and dropped my duffel bag onto the edge of the bed. The room cost $118.40 after taxes. The carpet had seen better decades. The air conditioner rattled every few minutes, and the ice machine outside sounded like it was trying to destroy itself. It wasn't much, but after the afternoon I'd had, it was the first place all day where nobody expected me to defend my existence. I laid the legal notices across the small round table beside the window. Eviction. Probate filing. Revised testament. I read every page again, this time the way I had been trained to review digital evidence before submitting it to military investigators. Not emotionally. Methodically. Every date. Every signature. Every witness. Every notary seal. Nothing jumped out immediately, but something still bothered me. The timeline. Grandpa had always called me before signing major legal documents. Not because he needed permission, because he enjoyed arguing through every possibility before making a decision. Now I was supposed to believe he rewrote a $21 million estate without leaving me a single voicemail. That wasn't him. I pushed the paperwork aside and reached for the weathered canvas duffel bag. Unlike the suitcase my mother had handed me, this bag actually contained my life, extra uniform ribbons, field notebooks, a laptop approved for military use, a small shaving kit I'd borrowed from another officer after mine disappeared during deployment. At the very bottom rested a worn leather journal wrapped carefully inside an old flannel shirt. Grandpa's diary. He'd mailed it to my overseas APO address less than 2 weeks before he died. The customs declaration simply described it as books. Typical Grandpa. He never advertised what mattered. Inside the package had also been the carved wooden Black Queen. I placed both items on the table. The diary smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. The first pages contained ordinary entries. Property inspections. Lunch with former business partners. Thoughts about arthritis medication. A complaint about someone parking too close to his truck at the hardware store. I smiled despite everything. That sounded exactly like him. Then I reached the final week of entries. The handwriting changed. Letters drifted downhill. Some words were scratched out. Others stopped halfway across the page. One sentence caught my attention. If they keep changing my medicine, I can't stay awake long enough to finish explaining. I frowned. Grandpa hated medication that affected his concentration. He once refused prescription painkillers after knee surgery because he said they made him feel like somebody borrowed my brain. The next page was worse. The handwriting barely resembled his. Only 3 words were legible: Black Queen Truth, nothing else. I picked up the chess piece. It fit comfortably in my palm. The carving showed years of careful sanding. Grandpa had made complete chess sets by hand every winter after retiring from the army. This one had always seemed heavier than it should. At the combat base overseas, I'd assumed the extra weight came from the hardwood itself. Now I wasn't so sure. I turned the piece over. The felt circle on the bottom looked slightly uneven. Grandpa never did sloppy woodworking. I grabbed my pocket knife from the duffel bag and carefully lifted one edge. The felt peeled away without resistance. Hidden underneath was a tiny circular compartment no wider than a quarter. My pulse slowed instead of speeding up. Training has a strange effect on people. The more serious the discovery, the calmer you're supposed to become. Inside rested a miniature microfilm chip sealed in a transparent waterproof sleeve. I stared at it for several seconds. Grandpa had served as an army colonel long before building his real estate company. He understood secure information. He also knew exactly what I did for a living. If he hid something this carefully, he intended for me, and only me, to find it. Fortunately, my forensic laptop included an external microfilm scanner I'd packed before deployment for digitizing archived evidence. Most people would have found that unusual. Military investigators wouldn't. 5 minutes later, scanned images began appearing across my screen. Medical charts, medication administration records, hospice care logs, physician notes. The files carried Grandpa's full legal name and patient identification number. I opened the medication records first. Something immediately looked wrong. Several drugs listed weren't unusual by themselves, but their frequency was. One sedative appeared every 6 hours, another every 4. Then an injectable medication had been administered repeatedly on overlapping schedules. I opened the physician authorization forms, blank, no matching orders. I checked the nursing logs. The medications were documented as given. The authorization pages remained unsigned. I leaned back. Either someone had forgotten to complete the paperwork, or someone had administered medication nobody had actually prescribed. I kept reading. Each administration time included precise entries. 7:05 a.m., 1:12 p.m., 7:18 p.m., 1:03 a.m. The pattern repeated day after day. Then I compared the dates against the probate documents lying beside my laptop. My eyes stopped moving. No, I checked again. The revised will had supposedly been drafted during that exact same week. I opened another medical report. Grandpa's cognitive assessment. The evaluating clinician noted prolonged drowsiness, delayed responses, difficulty maintaining attention, and repeated episodes where the patient couldn't remain awake long enough to complete conversations. Another report recommended reassessing the medication plan because the patient appeared excessively sedated. There was no follow-up. Instead, the sedation continued. I sat in complete silence. Grandpa hadn't simply been elderly. According to these unedited medical records, he spent the very week of the alleged estate revision drifting in and out of chemical sedation severe enough to interfere with basic conversations. Yet somehow, during that exact period, he was supposedly reviewing millions of dollars in assets, changing decades of estate planning, signing complex legal documents, and intentionally removing me from the family inheritance. I wasn't buying it. Not because I wanted the money, because I knew the man. Grandpa reviewed contracts with a sharpened pencil in one hand and a calculator in the other. He corrected spelling errors in restaurant menus. He once made a title company redraw closing documents because one property boundary measurement was off by 11 inches. That man would have spent hours reviewing every paragraph of a revised will. The man described in these records struggled to stay awake. I looked at the Black Queen sitting beside the laptop. Suddenly, the message he'd mailed overseas no longer sounded mysterious. It sounded deliberate. He knew something was happening. He knew someone might try to erase the truth after he was gone, and he trusted that if anyone could connect scattered pieces of evidence without letting emotion cloud judgment, it would be me. I closed the diary carefully and slipped the microfilm sleeve into a separate evidence envelope from my field kit. For the first time since standing on my parents' front porch, I wasn't wondering whether they had lied. I was wondering how many people had helped them do it. I slid the microfilm envelope back into my field case before leaving the motel. Grandpa had taught me one rule long before I ever wore a uniform. Never confront people with suspicions when you can confront them with documents. That rule had made him a successful developer. It had also made him impossible to cheat. Attorney Clayton Cross occupied the top floor of a quiet brick building overlooking the Norfolk County Courthouse. His office looked exactly the way I remembered it from years earlier: oak bookshelves, framed military photographs, and filing cabinets so neatly labeled they looked like part of the furniture. His receptionist recognized my last name before I introduced myself. "Mr. Cross has been expecting you." That caught me off guard. "Expecting me?" She simply smiled. "He'll explain." Clayton stood the moment I walked into his office. He was older than I remembered, his gray hair a little thinner, but his handshake was as firm as ever. "I wish we were meeting under different circumstances, Captain." "So do I." He didn't offer sympathy first. He offered coffee. Grandpa would have appreciated that. After I declined, Clayton closed his office door and looked directly at me. "Jedediah told me if you ever walked into this office wearing that uniform after he was gone, I should listen before I spoke." For the first time in days, I felt someone was treating me like family instead of an inconvenience. I placed the probate documents, the diary, and copies of the medical records on his conference table. He didn't interrupt while I explained everything: the revised will, the eviction, the medication records, the Black Queen. When I finished, he remained silent for nearly a minute. Then he opened one drawer and removed a thick binder labeled Rutherford Family Trust. "I refused to represent Clifton during probate." "Why?" He insisted on using Rutherford Developers' corporate attorneys instead. "Did he say why?" "He claimed it would be more efficient." Clayton gave a dry laugh. "In 40 years of probate work, nobody has ever replaced the attorney who drafted the original trust unless they wanted something the original attorney wouldn't approve." That answer sounded exactly like Grandpa's style of thinking. Facts first, assumptions later. Clayton opened several files on his computer while I connected my encrypted forensic laptop to the conference room monitor. "We're not looking for one mistake," I said. "We're looking for a pattern." He nodded. "Exactly." The audit lasted nearly 6 hours. Every probate filing, every court submission, every property schedule, every notarized attachment. Instead of reading them like lawyers, we treated them like evidence: dates, metadata, version histories, submission timestamps, corporate registrations, financial disclosures. By mid-afternoon, a pattern finally appeared. The revised estate documents referenced financing statements that had absolutely nothing to do with probate. Clayton leaned closer to the monitor. "That's odd." "What is?" He pointed toward a secured lender disclosure attached to one filing. Someone accidentally cross-referenced a private lending agreement. I enlarged the scanned pages. The borrower wasn't Cassie. It wasn't Clifton either. It was Giles Davenport. The amount made me whistle quietly. $14,800,000. Secured against anticipated inheritance proceeds. Clayton adjusted his glasses. "That's impossible. It shouldn't even exist." He nodded. "No legitimate lender would approve this unless they believed the inheritance was effectively guaranteed." We traced the lender through public corporate filings. The investment fund operated out of Manhattan through several holding companies. Another search uncovered federal disclosures involving offshore investment losses. Large ones. Very large ones. Giles hadn't built a successful investment career. He'd buried a spectacular failure. According to the records, nearly every major fund under his management had suffered catastrophic losses after aggressive offshore speculation 18 months earlier. He needed cash. Immediately. The expected $21 million inheritance wasn't simply making him wealthy. It was keeping him financially alive. "No wonder he's marrying Cassie so enthusiastically," Clayton muttered. "He already spent money that doesn't legally belong to him." I kept digging. People desperate enough to commit one kind of fraud usually leave traces of another. Military cyber forensics teaches you something simple. Data always travels with friends. After obtaining lawful authorization from Clayton as counsel for the trust investigation, we reviewed archived electronic disclosures that had accompanied the probate submissions. Most contained ordinary correspondence, scheduling emails, billing invoices, courier confirmations. Then one encrypted archive caught my attention. It had been mislabeled as administrative billing records. The encryption itself wasn't sophisticated. Someone wanted privacy, not professional security. 3 minutes later, the archive opened. Hundreds of emails appeared. Most were harmless. Then one subject line froze my attention. "Before she comes home," I clicked it. The sender was my mother, Sybil Rutherford. The recipient was Giles Davenport. The timestamp fell 2 days before my deployment officially ended. The email contained only 3 sentences. "We must close probate before Felicity returns. Once she signs the standard liability waiver, her military status will prevent her from contesting the estate. Clifton believes she'll sign anything if we tell her it's routine." Neither Clayton nor I spoke. I read the message again, slowly. Not because I misunderstood it. Because I wanted to be absolutely certain my anger wasn't changing the words. It wasn't. There it was. No misunderstanding. No missing context. They hadn't simply excluded me. They had planned the exclusion around my military service. Everything suddenly made sense. The rushed paperwork, the eviction notice, the pressure to leave without reading, the legal documents waiting at the front door, the $100 bill. Even Giles's fake politeness. They weren't grieving. They were racing against my arrival. Clayton quietly printed the email along with its metadata certification. The authenticity is intact, he said. No alterations. No. He looked across the table. Felicity, I know. You understand what this means. I do. He carefully placed the printed pages into an evidence folder. They believed your deployment made you vulnerable. I shook my head. They confused discipline with obedience. Grandpa had spent my entire childhood teaching me never to sign paperwork under pressure. The Army spent the next 15 years teaching me to verify every document before trusting it. Somehow my own family believed I'd abandoned both lessons the moment I walked through the front door. Instead, they'd handed me exactly what investigators hope every dishonest person eventually creates. A written conspiracy. And for the first time since Grandpa died, I realized something important. I wasn't trying to prove my innocence anymore. I was documenting theirs. I kept my hands off the evidence folder while Clayton reached for a locked cabinet behind his desk. Clayton returned carrying 2 archival storage boxes that looked older than some of the buildings Grandpa had owned. I've been waiting a long time to open these again, he said. He placed the boxes on the conference table and carefully removed several acid-free folders. Every document was protected inside transparent sleeves. Grandpa had insisted on preserving originals whenever possible, even after everything was scanned into digital records. Your grandfather believed paper still mattered, Clayton said. He was right. He smiled. He usually was. From another drawer, he pulled out a portable forensic document microscope. It resembled a compact laboratory scanner more than anything found in a lawyer's office. I don't use this often, he admitted. But when signatures become the argument instead of the contract, details decide everything. I had spent years examining altered digital evidence down to individual pixels. Watching Clayton prepare to examine ink strokes with the same discipline felt strangely familiar. Different field, same mindset. He placed the revised will beneath the microscope first. On the monitor, Grandpa's signature filled the screen. At normal size, it looked convincing. Magnified nearly 200 times, tiny inconsistencies began appearing. The pressure changes here, Clayton said, pointing to the capital J. I leaned closer. The ink pools differently. Exactly. He enlarged another section. Your grandfather always paused slightly before finishing the final flourish on Rutherford. The revised signature didn't. Instead, the stroke continued with nearly identical pressure from beginning to end. Whoever copied this had excellent visual skill, Clayton said. But they couldn't reproduce muscle memory, so it's forged? He held up one finger. I believe it is. Can you prove it? Not yet. That answer didn't frustrate me. It reassured me. Good investigators never confuse belief with proof. Clayton pulled out 3 estate amendments Grandpa had signed over the previous decade. We compared them one after another. The differences accumulated. Stroke direction, pen pressure, natural hesitation, microscopic ink distribution. Individually, none guaranteed forgery. Together, they painted a picture that became increasingly difficult to ignore. Still, Clayton didn't celebrate. Even if we eventually established the signature was forged, he said, the opposing attorneys will fight every inch of that claim. So we need something. Stronger. Much stronger. He flipped through the remaining probate packet. His expression suddenly changed. Not excitement, confusion. He stopped on the final codicil, the amendment transferring Grandpa's commercial real estate portfolio into the revised estate plan. That's strange. What? He adjusted the page under the light. No, he grabbed the original trust agreement for comparison, then another reference binder, then Massachusetts probate statutes from his bookshelf. Without saying another word, he began reading. 5 silent minutes passed. I knew better than to interrupt. When Clayton concentrated like that, conversationally slowed him down. Finally, he looked up. Felicity, you found something. I may have found everything. He turned the monitor toward me. This codicil transfers virtually the entire commercial portfolio. I nodded. The shopping centers, office buildings, industrial properties. Correct. He pointed to the execution page. Read the witness section. I counted. 1 witnesses, then Grandpa's signature, then the notary acknowledgement. Looks complete. It isn't. He opened the Massachusetts probate reference beside it. For a codicil structured this way, naming a designated neutral witness during execution, both designated witness lines must be properly completed. I looked back at the document. Only one signature appeared. Was completely blank, not crossed out, not marked unavailable, blank. I frowned. Maybe they forgot. Clayton slowly removed his glasses. If that's what happened, he leaned back in his chair. Someone just destroyed their entire case, he explained carefully. The revised will itself attempted to redirect assets, but the commercial real estate, the overwhelming majority of Grandpa's $21 million estate, was transferred through this separate codicil. Without proper execution, that transfer never became legally effective. The missing signature wasn't cosmetic, it wasn't optional. It was a statutory requirement under the very procedure Clifton's attorneys had chosen. I read the page again. One empty line. One overlooked signature. Months of planning, undone by a single administrative failure. They forged Grandpa's signature, I said quietly. They may have. They rushed probate. Yes. They pressured me to sign liability waivers. They certainly tried. And through all of that, I tapped the blank witness line. Nobody noticed this. Clayton laughed for the first time all day. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It sounded like decades of courtroom experience recognizing a mistake so unbelievable it almost deserved respect. Fraud has a habit of becoming overconfident. He carefully assembled every supporting statute beside the document. They spent enormous effort creating something that looked authentic, but they ignored procedure. Exactly. Grandpa used to tell me that amateurs obsessed over appearances while professionals obsessed over process. Now I understood why. One missing signature could outweigh 100 convincing pages. Clayton began outlining our options. We don't confront them. I wasn't planning to. We let them continue believing they've already won. I nodded. They're still exposing themselves. Every day. He slid the invalid codicil into a separate evidence sleeve marked primary litigation exhibit. For the moment, this stays between us. I agree. If Clifton learns about this today, he'll try to repair the damage, if he legally can. He can't repair an improperly executed original. He smiled again. But dishonest people often try impossible things. As we organized the evidence, my phone buzzed with another voicemail notification from an unknown Boston number. I ignored it. Anyone rushing me today could wait. Grandpa had left me something far more valuable than an inheritance. He had left me patience. Before leaving Clayton's office, I paused beside the conference table. The revised will that had been used to throw me out of my own family home suddenly looked very different. Less powerful, less permanent. Just expensive paper resting on one fatal omission. On my way to the elevator, something crossed my mind. What happened inside my family was already shocking enough. Yet the deeper we dug, the more it reminded me of another case that proved greed almost always leaves behind one careless mistake. If you're following this story, keep an eye on the top right corner of your screen between minutes 45 and 55. That case fits this one in ways you wouldn't expect. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time since Grandpa died, I wasn't wondering whether the truth would survive. I was deciding the exact moment to let everyone else see it. I slipped the evidence envelope back into my briefcase before walking into Rutherford Developers headquarters. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Captain Rutherford. Mr. Rutherford is expecting you. Of course he was. People who think they've already won rarely worry about who walks through the front door. The executive floor looked exactly as I remembered. The polished marble, oversized artwork, and expensive furniture were all designed to impress visitors before anyone said a word. Grandpa used to joke that if a company spent more money decorating the lobby than training its employees, something was probably wrong. I smiled to myself. He would have had plenty to say about this place. A young assistant escorted me into Clifton's private study. My father sat behind a massive walnut desk. Giles occupied one of the leather chairs across from him, scrolling through something on his phone. A thick folder rested neatly in front of them. The liability waiver. Exactly where Clayton predicted it would be. I took a slow breath before stepping inside. Then I became someone else. My shoulders dropped. My posture lost its usual confidence. I deliberately slowed my movements, letting my right hand shake just enough to be noticeable without looking theatrical. Combat fatigue. That was the story they wanted. I was happy to give it to them. Clifton looked almost relieved. There you are. I've been thinking. His expression softened for the first time in days. Not because he cared. Because he believed the pressure was finally working. I know this has all been overwhelming, he said. I lowered my eyes. I haven't slept much. Giles exchanged a quick glance with him. Exactly what I wanted. People become careless the moment they think they're watching someone fall apart. Clifton pushed the folder toward me. This doesn't have to become unpleasant. I gave a weak nod. I don't think my head is clear. What do you mean? I keep reading the same paragraphs. I rubbed my forehead. I spent 15 months working rotating shifts, different time zones, constant alerts. Everything still feels foggy. The lie tasted strange. The army had trained me to remain calm under pressure. Today I was pretending I couldn't manage a few pages of legal paperwork. Giles leaned forward. That's understandable. I don't want to sign something I don't fully understand. His smile remained perfectly polite. That's exactly why we're here. No, I said quietly. I mean, I really can't focus. I let several seconds pass. Then I looked directly at Clifton. Could I have 48 hours? His jaw tightened immediately. For what? To clear my head. You've had plenty of time. I just buried my grandfather. You missed the funeral. I know. The room fell silent. I allowed the silence to work in my favor. Eventually, I spoke again. I don't want lawyers arguing later that I signed something while I wasn't thinking straight. Clifton's fingers tapped the desk once, then again. He was losing patience. Good. Impatient people reveal more than careful ones. This is routine paperwork, he said. I'm sure it is, so sign it. I will. When? In 48 hours. Giles stepped in before Clifton could answer. Captain, his tone became almost friendly. There's really nothing complicated here. He opened the folder and pointed to several highlighted sections. This simply confirms you've notice regarding the estate and that you aren't raising any immediate objections. I'd still like to read everything. You can. After I've rested. Clifton sighed dramatically. This Mill looked at him without speaking. You people think every document is a classified operation. I almost laughed. If only he knew. Instead, I lowered my eyes again. I'm sorry. He mistook the apology for surrender. Another mistake. Giles slid his chair closer. Let's make this easy. He reached inside his jacket pocket and removed a heavy gold fountain pen engraved with his initials. The pen landed softly on the folder between us. Just sign today. I looked at it without touching it. I really shouldn't. Why? I don't trust myself. He smiled. You don't have to trust yourself. That sentence lingered in the room longer than he intended. I looked up slowly. What? I mean, he corrected himself quickly. You can trust us. I said nothing. Silence has a way of making nervous people keep talking. Sure enough, Giles filled it. Delaying this creates unnecessary problems. What kind of problems? He glanced toward Clifton before answering. The Army values cooperation. So does everyone. I've worked with government agencies before. Something about the way he said it felt rehearsed. He leaned closer until only the two of us could comfortably hear. You've built a respectable military career. I've tried. It would be unfortunate if unnecessary legal disputes raised questions about your judgment. There it was. Not a direct threat. Not yet. I kept my breathing steady. My judgment? Your command doesn't like officers involved in ugly family litigation. I've never heard that policy. He smiled again. You'd be surprised what reaches the right people. I stared at him. He mistook my silence for fear. He leaned in even farther. If this turns into a public probate fight, people may start wondering whether someone trusted with sensitive military investigations exercises good decision-making in her personal affairs. His voice dropped lower. I'd hate to see that affect your future promotions. The room became very quiet. Clifton didn't interrupt him. He simply watched. That told me everything. This wasn't Giles improvising. They expected intimidation to finish what deception had started. What neither of them knew was that my military-issued secure terminal rested inside my canvas duffel bag beside the chair. Before entering the building, I had activated an authorized evidence recording function used during approved investigative interviews. Every word, every pause, every threat, time-stamped, encrypted, authenticated, automatically stored. Giles gently pushed the gold pen another inch toward me. Nobody needs to know this conversation happened. I looked down at the pen, then slowly pushed the folder back across the desk. I'm sorry. My voice sounded small. I still need 48 hours. Clifton's face hardened. You'll regret making this difficult. I probably will. I stood, lifted my duffel bag onto my shoulder, and gave them one last exhausted look before walking toward the door. Neither man tried to stop me. They believed they'd shaken me badly enough that I'd return in 2 days ready to surrender. The office door closed quietly behind me. Only then did my shoulders straighten. Only then did the tremor disappear from my hands. As the elevator carried me toward the lobby, I checked the recording status on the secure terminal. The audio file had captured every second of the meeting without interruption. For the second time in less than a week, the people trying hardest to silence me had handed me exactly what I needed. They thought they had watched a frightened daughter fall apart. In reality, they had just volunteered evidence that no honest man would ever have created. I left the secure terminal connected only long enough to verify the recording had been sealed with its authentication log before shutting every wireless function off. The conference room Clayton reserved for us had no windows, no smart speakers, and no unnecessary electronics. That was exactly how I wanted it. I placed my military laptop on the table and disconnected every wireless adapter before booting into the forensic environment. Habit mattered. In my line of work, people lost cases because they assumed a network was secure instead of proving it. Clayton watched me work. I've never seen anyone build a workstation that carefully. I've seen investigations collapse because someone clicked the wrong icon. He nodded. I'll stay in my lane. Grandpa always liked Clayton because he never pretended to know things he didn't. I appreciated the same quality. Using my authorized military signal intelligence credentials, I established a secure air-gapped evidence environment to review certified court records and coordinate with the agencies already looking into suspicious financial activity. Nothing on my workstation touched the public internet directly. Every file entering the system had to be verified before it crossed into the isolated environment. This isn't about hacking anything, I said, while reviewing another authentication screen. It never should be. We're documenting evidence that already exists. Clayton smiled. That's a sentence every jury should hear. A few minutes later, we were joined by 2 federal financial investigators through an approved secure evidence conference. Special Agent Marissa Cole handled financial fraud. Special Agent Daniel Mercer specialized in complex wire transfer investigations involving shell companies. Neither wasted time. Cole opened with a simple question. Captain Rutherford, do you believe the inheritance has already been moved? I believe someone has started trying. Mercer answered before I could continue. Your timing was good. He shared certified banking records already obtained through lawful process. Several transactions had been prepared. Most remained incomplete. One stood out immediately. Beneficiary. Helvetia Strategic Holdings AG registered in Switzerland. Expected incoming amount. 21,000. Status. Pending release. Clayton leaned closer. They're moving the entire commercial portfolio value. Mercer nodded. They're treating the revised probate documents as if ownership is already settled. It isn't. We know. I studied the transfer timeline. The request hadn't been completed. Instead, it sat inside what banking investigators called a holding queue, a temporary stage where supporting documentation was verified before final release. Whoever initiated the transfer still needed to finalize several certifications. That meant one important thing. The crime wasn't finished, not yet. They're missing something, I said. Mercer enlarged another document. The receiving institution requested confirmation of legal authority over estate assets, so Giles still has to provide it. Correct. Clayton looked toward me. If we notify them today, they'll stop and probably destroy evidence. I nodded. They've already shown us exactly how they operate. Rush, pressure, paperwork, then intimidation. People like Clifton and Giles relied on momentum. If momentum disappeared, they'd start protecting themselves instead of exposing themselves. Cole folded her hands. What are you proposing? We don't interrupt them. Clayton looked surprised. You want to let this continue? I want them to finish making their decision. Mercer understood immediately. You want intent. Exactly. Fraud investigations rarely succeed because someone thinks about committing a crime. They succeed because someone voluntarily crosses the final legal line. Grandpa used to compare dishonest businessmen to impatient poker players. They always show one card too many. This felt exactly the same. Over the next day, evidence continued arriving. Corporate authorizations, bank certifications, digital timestamps. Every new document strengthened the timeline. Then another certified record appeared. Originating authorization. Giles Davenport electronic certification completed. Supporting probate documents uploaded. The final banking checklist now contained only one remaining requirement. Original paper certification. Clayton looked across the table. He's really doing it. He believes nobody can stop him. Mercer quietly added another update. Our surveillance indicates he has already scheduled the physical signing. When? Tomorrow afternoon. Exactly 48 hours after my meeting at Rutherford Developers. Exactly when Giles expected me to return and sign the liability waiver. He wasn't waiting because he respected my request. He simply wanted every signature collected before releasing the money. Everything fit together. The forged will, the pressure campaign, the waiver, the transfer. None of it happened by accident. Cole looked to intervene now. I shook my head. Not yet. Clayton studied my face for several seconds. You've already decided. I have. If we move today, he'll claim it was an administrative misunderstanding. And tomorrow, he won't have that argument. Mercer nodded slowly. Tomorrow, he commits to the transfer on paper. Exactly. Then every defense becomes much harder. I closed the banking records. For years, I had taught younger investigators that timing mattered almost as much as evidence. Arrest someone too early, and they blamed confusion. Wait until they knowingly signed the final document, and confusion disappeared. The following afternoon, we monitored certified updates as they arrived through the investigation. At 2:11 p.m., Giles entered the lending office. At 2:26 p.m., identity verification was completed. At 2:39 p.m., the estate documentation was presented. At 2:47 p.m., he signed the final authorization affirming he possessed lawful authority to transfer the inheritance. Mercer looked at me. This is it. I read the certification one last time. Giles wasn't guessing. He wasn't estimating. He had signed a legal declaration stating the assets belonged to him through Cassie's inheritance. He committed the statement voluntarily, knowingly, on paper. I looked at Clayton. Now. Mercer immediately transmitted the pre-authorized preservation request that froze the pending transfer before a single dollar could leave the holding queue. Within seconds, the banking status changed. Pending release became frozen by federal order. No money reached Switzerland. No assets disappeared. More importantly, every fraudulent certification remained permanently attached to the investigation. Clayton let out a slow breath. They spent weeks building this, and one signature buried it. I smiled slightly. Funny how that kept happening. First, they overlooked one missing witness signature that left the revised will legally broken. Now Giles had added one signature too many. Grandpa used to say greed made intelligent people rush past the point where caution should have taken over. Watching the frozen transaction appear across my screen, I realized he had been right one last time. The trap wasn't sprung when we found the evidence. It sprang the moment they became so confident that they signed their own names beneath a lie. I adjusted the last button on my Army service dress uniform before stepping out of the car. The country club's entrance glowed under carefully placed lights, and a line of luxury vehicles stretched along the circular driveway. Valet hurried between imported sedans and vintage collector cars, while photographers waited near the entrance for Boston's familiar faces. I handed my parking ticket to the valet. He glanced at my uniform, then straightened his posture. "Good evening, Captain." "Evening." No questions, no assumptions, just respect. It was refreshing. Inside, the ballroom looked less like a family celebration and more like a corporate merger. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. A string quartet played near the dance floor. Servers carried trays filled with lobster bites, miniature beef Wellington, and champagne that probably cost more than the motel room where I'd spent the last several nights. Large floral arrangements surrounded the stage. Above them hung a gold banner celebrating Cassie and Giles. Several guests noticed me almost immediately. Not because they recognized me. Because uniforms stand out in rooms where everyone else is competing through expensive suits and designer gowns. I walked calmly toward the back of the ballroom. No one stopped me. Not yet. Cassie stood on the stage wearing an ivory designer gown covered in hand-sewn crystal details. She smiled effortlessly as guests congratulated her one after another. She looked exactly like someone convinced the future had already been purchased. Giles never wandered far from her side. Every handshake he accepted seemed slightly too enthusiastic. Now I understood why. He wasn't celebrating love. He was celebrating what he believed would soon become a $21 million rescue package. Clifton moved comfortably through the crowd, greeting investors, developers, city officials, and campaign donors. I recognized several faces from newspaper articles Grandpa used to criticize over Sunday breakfast. He always reminded me that expensive tuxedos couldn't hide bad character. Watching the room, I realized he had underestimated how well some people tried. One older developer approached me. "I don't believe we've met." "Felicity Rutherford." His eyebrows lifted. "Jedediah's granddaughter?" "Yes." He smiled warmly. "Your grandfather spoke highly of the Army. He spent most conversations trying to recruit people into it." The man laughed. "That sounds like Jed." For a few minutes, we talked about Grandpa instead of money. He remembered construction sites where Grandpa insisted on eating lunch with electricians instead of executives. Another guest recalled Grandpa refusing to approve a project until every subcontractor had been paid. Story after story sounded like the man who had raised me. None sounded like someone who would suddenly erase one granddaughter from his life. Across the ballroom, Clifton finally noticed me. His smile disappeared instantly. He whispered something to Giles. Within seconds, both men started walking toward me. I remained exactly where I was. "Who invited you?" Clifton asked quietly. "I was invited by whom?" "My last name." His jaw tightened. "You should leave. I came to congratulate the happy couple." Cassie joined us, champagne in hand. "I don't think anyone wants another scene. I haven't made one." "Not yet." She glanced at my uniform. "I would have thought you'd wear something." less dramatic. I looked down at the Bronze Star ribbon above my pocket. The Purple Heart ribbon sat beside it. My captain's insignia reflected softly beneath the ballroom lights. This isn't dramatic. It's my uniform. Several nearby conversations had already gone quiet. People sensed something unfolding. Clifton noticed the growing audience. That was when I realized he wasn't going to handle this privately. He cared too much about appearances. He always preferred public victories. A few moments later, the Master of Ceremonies welcomed everyone to the stage for opening remarks. Clifton accepted the microphone with the confidence of a man accustomed to applause. He thanked investors. He thanked friends. He thanked political supporters. Then his eyes found me. There is one additional matter I'd like to address tonight. The room became still. I didn't move. I believe honesty is important. A few polite laughs drifted through the audience. Clifton continued. Families sometimes face difficult situations. His voice carried easily through the ballroom. Unfortunately, not every relative chooses gratitude over resentment. Now every eye in the room rested on me. Cassie lowered her champagne glass, but couldn't hide the anticipation on her face. Giles looked almost excited. Clifton pointed toward me. My eldest daughter has spent the past week attempting to disrupt our family during a time that should have been devoted to healing. A quiet murmur spread across the crowd. I've tolerated enough. He paused dramatically. Despite wearing a military uniform, she has contributed almost nothing to the family business. I remained silent. She wants attention. Another pause. She wants sympathy. He smiled without warmth. But most of all, he looked directly into my eyes. She wants something she did not earn. The room stayed silent, not supportive, not hostile, waiting. Then came the sentence he had clearly rehearsed. She is an unstable, resentful desk clerk who is no longer recognized as a Rutherford. Someone near the back gasped. Another guest quietly set down a champagne glass. Even people who knew nothing about me seemed uncomfortable. Clifton mistook their silence for approval. He continued speaking. My father built this family through discipline. I almost laughed. Grandpa absolutely had. Just not the kind Clifton meant. He expected responsibility, more silence. He expected dignity. That word almost echoed inside my head. Dignity. Coming from the man who had hidden a funeral from his own daughter. The man who handed me a crumpled $100 bill after evicting me. The man who believed threatening someone's military career counted as responsible leadership. I still didn't interrupt. Military training teaches patience as much as courage. Sometimes the strongest position in a room belongs to the person willing to let someone else keep talking. Clifton finally lowered the microphone. His expression suggested he believed the matter was finished. Around the ballroom, conversations resumed slowly, but something had changed. People weren't looking at me with suspicion. They were looking at him. One elderly investor quietly shook his head. A retired judge whispered something to the woman beside him. The developer I'd spoken with earlier looked openly disappointed. Nobody applauded, not one person. I stood exactly where I was, hands resting naturally behind my back, my uniform pressed, my medals catching the light. For the first time all evening, I realized the room had started comparing two very different definitions of respect. One man demanded it with a microphone. The other had spent a lifetime earning it. Clifton had no idea that before the night was over, the story he had just told this room would become impossible for anyone there to believe. I kept my hands behind my back while the room waited for me to react. Clifton was still standing at the microphone, wearing the satisfied smile of a man who believed public humiliation was the same thing as winning. One of the country club security managers started walking toward me. He wasn't aggressive. He looked embarrassed. I'll need to ask you to leave, ma'am. Before he reached me, the ballroom's heavy double doors slammed open. Every conversation stopped. Colonel Theron Blackwood walked in first. His Army service uniform was immaculate, every ribbon perfectly aligned. I'd served under him long enough to recognize the expression on his face. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. That was usually worse. Behind him came Special Agent Marissa Cole, Special Agent Daniel Mercer, and 4 Massachusetts state troopers. None of them hurried. None of them needed to. The room quietly split apart as guests stepped out of their way. Clifton frowned. What is this? Colonel Blackwood didn't answer him. He walked directly toward me. When he stopped, he gave me a crisp salute. I returned it immediately. Captain Rutherford, sir, I appreciate your professionalism. Thank you, sir. Only then did he turn toward the stage. I'm Colonel Theron Blackwood, United States Army. His voice carried naturally across the ballroom without needing the microphone. I am here because Captain Rutherford has conducted herself with exceptional restraint during an investigation involving serious allegations of financial fraud and document forgery. The silence deepened. Clifton forced a laugh. There has obviously been some misunderstanding. There has, Colonel Blackwood replied. It just isn't ours. Clayton Cross stepped through the doorway carrying 2 evidence cases and a slim laptop. Unlike everyone else in the room, he looked completely relaxed. He walked onto the stage without asking permission. Clayton, Clifton snapped. Get off that platform. I drafted Jedediah Rutherford's original trust. Clayton calmly connected his laptop to the ballroom's audio-visual control panel. I also know exactly what your attorneys filed with the probate court. A technician hurried toward him. I'm sorry, sir. The presentation system is reserved. Clayton handed him a court authorization. You'll want to read that. The technician glanced at the document, nodded once, and stepped aside. A second later, the giant projection screens surrounding the ballroom went dark. Then the first document appeared. Certified Original Rutherford Family Trust. The title alone changed the mood of the room. Several real estate investors leaned forward. One retired judge removed his glasses and looked more closely. Clayton picked up the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting your evening. His tone remained calm. But many of you have spent your careers relying on properly executed contracts. He clicked to the next slide. This is the trust executed by Colonel Jedediah Rutherford. Every certification, every witness, every notarization, every page, complete. No one has questioned this document for years. Another click. The revised will appeared beside it. Last week, a revised estate plan was submitted. The screen zoomed toward Grandpa's signature. Then Clayton overlaid the forensic comparison we had prepared. Magnified ink patterns, pressure analysis, stroke sequencing, natural hesitation points. The ballroom became so quiet I could hear the projector fan. This analysis compares authenticated historical signatures against the signature appearing on the revised will. He highlighted the capital J, then the final flourish, then microscopic pressure differences. The evidence is consistent with simulation rather than natural execution. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed anymore. Clifton's face slowly lost its color. That's ridiculous, he said. Clayton ignored him. The next slide displayed Grandpa's medical records recovered from the Black Queen. Medication administration logs, cognitive assessments, hospice treatment records, dates, times, everything. These certified medical records demonstrate that Colonel Rutherford remained under continuous chemical sedation during the precise period in which he allegedly reviewed and executed this revised estate plan. Someone quietly whispered, "My God, Clayton wasn't finished." He projected the email between Sybil and Giles. The metadata appeared beside it. Sender, recipient, timestamp. Then the words filled the screen. We must close probate before Felicity returns. Once she signs the standard liability waiver, her military status will prevent her from contesting the estate. A woman near the front table slowly lowered her wine glass. Nobody spoke. The room no longer looked shocked. It looked betrayed. Giles suddenly stepped forward. Those emails were taken out of context. Special Agent Mercer answered before Clayton could. They were recovered through lawful evidentiary procedures. Giles immediately stopped talking. Clayton changed slides again. This time the screen displayed banking records. Pending wire transfer. Helvetia Strategic Holdings AG. Amount, $21,000 by federal order. Another page appeared. Giles Davenport's signed authorization certifying lawful ownership of the inheritance. The signature matched perfectly. No forgery there, because Giles had signed it himself. Then Clayton reached the final exhibit. He held up the physical codicil inside a protective evidence sleeve. This document attempted to transfer the commercial real estate portfolio, valued at approximately $21 million. He enlarged the execution page until it filled every screen in the ballroom. Please direct your attention here. A laser pointer settled on one blank line. The second designated neutral witness, empty. No signature, no initials, nothing. Clayton opened a certified copy of the applicable Massachusetts probate requirement beside it. For this codicil to become legally effective, execution required the designated witness signatures shown here. He pointed once more to the blank line. One is missing. He paused. Without that signature, the next slide appeared. The attempted transfer never became legally effective. He let the words settle before continuing. As a matter of law, the revised transfer failed. Another click. The original Rutherford Family Trust returned to the screen. This remains the controlling legal instrument. Absolute silence. Not polite silence, not awkward silence. The kind that arrives when every excuse in a room dies at exactly the same moment. I looked toward the guests. Nobody was staring at me anymore. Every face had turned toward Clifton, toward Sybil, toward Cassie, toward Giles. Only a week earlier, they had presented themselves as Boston's perfect family. Now they looked like people who had mistaken wealth for immunity. Grandpa used to tell me that character eventually becomes public, even when lies stay private for a while. Standing in that ballroom, watching the truth illuminate every screen around us, I realized this wasn't revenge. It was accountability finally catching up with people who thought paperwork could erase integrity. I remained exactly where I was while the final slide stayed frozen on the ballroom screens. Nobody applauded. Nobody moved. The silence ended only when Special Agent Marissa Cole stepped onto the stage carrying 2 folders. This investigation is no longer a civil probate matter. Her voice was calm enough that nobody needed to wonder whether she meant business. It is now a criminal investigation. Another federal agent walked beside her. Behind them, the Massachusetts state troopers quietly spread through the ballroom. No sirens, no shouting. Just trained professionals doing their jobs. Cole opened the first folder. Clifton Rutherford. My father looked around the room as if someone else might answer for him. You are being served with warrants relating to bank fraud, grand larceny, conspiracy, and forgery. His face turned white. This is absurd, she continued reading. You have the right to remain silent, he interrupted her. My attorneys, you are welcome to contact them after processing. A state trooper stepped beside him. For the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say that changed the direction of a room. Mercer opened the second folder. Giles Davenport. Giles didn't even try to look confident anymore. You are under arrest for wire fraud, fraudulent financial certifications, attempted unlawful transfer of estate assets, and related financial crimes. His knees almost gave out. This was Cassie's inheritance. Mercer held up the certified banking documents. No. He pointed toward Giles's own signature. This was your lie. The handcuffs clicked into place. The sound echoed further than Clifton's front door had echoed a week earlier. Funny how some sounds stay with you. Across the ballroom, Cassie's champagne glass slipped from her hand. It shattered across the marble floor. Nobody rushed to clean it up. Nobody cared. Clayton quietly returned to the microphone. Before anyone leaves tonight, one final legal matter requires clarification. The original Rutherford family trust appeared once more on every screen. He turned several pages before stopping at a section Grandpa and I had reviewed together years ago while replacing roof shingles on one of his office buildings. I remembered asking why estate documents mattered so much. Grandpa answered with a smile. Because families become unpredictable when money arrives. Clayton adjusted his glasses. Colonel Jedediah Rutherford anticipated the possibility that any later amendment could be challenged or declared invalid. He pointed to the highlighted paragraph. Under the controlling trust language, if a later estate modification fails legal execution, administration automatically returns to the original trust. Another click, one sentence appeared in large letters. Primary executor and sole residual beneficiary, Captain Felicity Ann Rutherford. A quiet wave of disbelief passed through the room. Several guests looked toward me. Not with pity, not with curiosity, with understanding. Grandpa hadn't forgotten me. He had protected me. Even after his death, Clayton closed the binder. As a matter of law, Captain Felicity Rutherford is the sole executor of the Rutherford family trust and the lawful primary heir of the estate. No dramatic music, no cheering, just facts. Exactly the way Grandpa would have wanted it. Then I heard footsteps behind me. My mother, when I turned, Sybil was already crying. Real tears this time, not polished ones. She reached for my hands. I stepped back before she could touch me. Felicity, her voice cracked. We made mistakes. I said nothing. We're still your family. Still nothing. Cassie suddenly dropped to her knees beside her. Mascara streaked down her face. The confident socialite who had twirled Grandpa's brass keys only days earlier had disappeared. I'm begging you. She grabbed the edge of my sleeve. Please withdraw everything. I can't. You can, no. You'll destroy us. I looked down at her. You already did that yourselves. She started crying harder. Please, don't let them take Dad. You should have thought about that before forging Grandpa's wishes. It wasn't supposed to go this far, I almost answered. Then I remembered Grandpa's favorite lesson from chess. Not every move deserves a response. Sometimes silence forces people to face the position they created. I gently pulled my sleeve free. Neither woman tried to stop me again. I walked toward the ballroom exit. Every guest moved aside without being asked. Some nodded respectfully. A retired judge quietly said, "Your grandfather would be proud." I simply thanked him. Near the doorway, Colonel Blackwood caught up with me. You handled yourself well, Captain. I had good teachers. He smiled. I believe that. Before leaving, I looked once toward the stage. Federal agents were escorting Clifton and Giles away. Clayton was organizing evidence. Guests spoke quietly among themselves. No one looked at wealth anymore. They looked at consequences. Outside, a light rain had started. The soles of my dress shoes picked up damp soil from the landscaping as I crossed the stone entrance. When I walked through the lobby one last time, faint mud-stained footprints appeared behind me on the club's immaculate cream-colored carpet. I noticed them. I didn't apologize. Some marks belong exactly where they're left. The heavy front doors closed behind me with one firm, unmistakable sound. This time, I wasn't the one being locked out. The people who had measured my worth by inheritance, social status, and appearances were finally locked inside the prison they had built for themselves. I placed Grandpa's Black Queen on the passenger seat before starting the engine. The road ahead was empty. For the first time in weeks, so was my mind. I never wanted revenge simply because someone hurt me. Revenge without purpose only creates another victim. What I wanted was the truth to stand where lies had been standing, and for dignity to matter more than money. Grandpa taught me that your name is something you earn every day, not something you inherit once. He also taught me that respect cannot be forged, purchased, or demanded into existence. It grows from honesty, responsibility, and the quiet choices nobody else sees. Losing people who never truly valued you is painful, but keeping them at the cost of your self-respect is far more expensive. If this story leaves you with anything, I hope it's this. Never let anyone convince you that protecting your integrity makes you selfish. Sometimes walking away is the strongest proof that you've finally learned your own worth. Before you leave, take a look at the video waiting for you on your screen right now. It's one of the stories our viewers continue recommending to friends, because the ending changes everything you think you know. If this journey meant something to you, I think that one will stay with you long after it ends too.